Going into this season, the New York Giants have had very few reasons to be optimistic. Despite a surprisingly good 2022 season in which the team won their first playoff game in a decade, the team came crashing back down to earth last year with a 6-11 record, far away from playoff contention. And after the first two games of the season ended in defeats to the Vikings and Commanders, hope in New York was through the floor as the team slumped to an 0-2 record yet again, with Giants fans watching the same old story unfolding right in front of their eyes. But on Sunday, the Giants picked up a shock of a first win of the season in Cleveland in a game they had entered as 6.5-point underdogs. And while this Giants offense and of course quarterback Daniel Jones have come in for intense criticism recently, the team might have just found their own offensive star of the future and the best wide receiver they've had since Odell Beckham Jr. Here, we'll talk about Malik Nabers and just how good he is, and how he's going to save Daniel Jones and the Giants going forward. Malik Nabers was born on July 28, 2003 in Lafayette, Louisiana, and like so many young boys in the South, he was obsessed with football from a young age. However, he had a tough childhood growing up, and as a result, he didn't play football as much as many of his peers due to the financial constraints faced by his family. However, Nabers' athleticism was obvious to anyone from an extremely early age, and by the time he was playing high school football in Lafayette, it was clear that he was going to be something special. In his final season of high school football in 2019, he was the most prolific wide receiver in Louisiana, scoring 21 touchdowns and racking up 1,223 receiving yards on the year. This attracted offers from several big schools, but Nabers opted to stay in the Pelican State and become an LSU Tiger for the 2021 college football season. Just 2 years prior, LSU had won a national title with Joe Burrow under center as arguably the best college football team of all time. Burrow himself had an all-time elite receiving duo to throw to in both Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase, and now Nabers was on the scene, looking to become the next great LSU wideout. In his freshman year, Nabers did feature in every game, but was somewhat limited in his targets, getting just 28 receptions for 417 yards across his 11 games. And for a freshman on an SEC roster, though, it can often take time to adapt to college ball, and he did show flashes of what he could do and be capable of, including a 143-yard game against Louisiana Monroe. As expected, Nabers' sophomore year was much better, partly aided by a new quarterback, that is, of course, fellow future first-round pick Jayden Daniels. The young wideout was starting to catch the eye of NFL scouts, improving again as the year went on, and helping the school to share of the SEC West Division title. And in the final game of the season, the 2023 Citrus Bowl, Nabers went off, going for 163 receiving yards against Purdue and a blowout 63-7 victory, as well as throwing a touchdown to Jayden Daniels for extra good measure. And having put together a 1,000-yard season as a sophomore, his junior year was about to see him rise to entirely new heights. Nabers averaged 129 yards a game during his 2023 season, constantly torching the secondaries of some of the best programs in the nation. His connection with Jayden Daniels was as good as any you'll see in all of college football as they helped the Tigers to a 10-3 season, suffering a couple tough losses along the way, including a 42-28 shootout against Alabama, in which Nabers did put up 171 yards in a score in a losing effort. At the end of the year, Nabers was unsurprisingly named to the All-SEC team and was also named a consensus All-American alongside fellow superstar receivers Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze. Nabers also picked up a piece of school history along the way, becoming the all-time leading receiver in yards for LSU despite not returning for his senior year, but instead declaring for the NFL draft. Of all the elite receivers that have gone to school in Death Valley, none have as many receiving yards for the Tigers as Nabers' 3,003. Not Justin Jefferson, not Ja'Marr Chase, and not even Odell Beckham Jr. Now that his phenomenal, record-breaking college career was over, it was time for Nabers to take his talents to pro football. Nabers was always tipped to go earlier in the draft alongside fellow wideouts Harrison Jr. and Odunze, but predicting his landing spot was certainly a tricky spot for many draft analysts, with some predicting that the Giants would use their number 6 pick on a replacement quarterback from the much-maligned Daniel Jones, who suffered a brutal 2023 season while healthy, throwing just 2 touchdowns and 6 picks in his 6 games. But ultimately, the Giants have sunk too much money into the Daniel Jones experiment to give up just yet. Jones is now in the second year of his Neighbors' 4-year, $160 million contract, and in his defense, he wasn't really given many receiving options last year, with Darius Slayton being the best of a pretty bad bunch. So, of course, on draft night, the Giants general manager decided to give him a new true elite offensive weapon, wide receiver out of LSU, Malik Neighbors. He ended up being the second receiver drafted, with Marvin Harrison Jr. going 4th overall to the Arizona Cardinals. Harrison Jr. is without question a generational talent himself, but honestly, it seems like both these men are just can't-fail prospects who look set to tear up the league for years to come. So far, we've talked about the raw numbers that Neighbors put up in college, but it's arguable that even his 1,500-yard season doesn't quite do just how game-changing a player Malik Neighbors really is. His highlight reel shows him to have incredible acceleration and that he's able to get into space quickly, but also can create that separation through elite route running, sending cornerbacks and safeties the wrong way. He's one of those wide receivers you can plan an entire offense around, capable of keeping drives alive with short receptions, but also capable of turning those into long gains. This makes him not unlike Tyreek Hill, catching the ball between the numbers and racing past defenders. And crucially, he seems like the kind of guy who might have just given Daniel Jones' Giants career a second go-around. Jones has split opinion in this league since he became a starter for the Giants back in 2019, having been a surprisingly high overall 6th draft pick out of Duke. His first 3 seasons in the Giants uniform saw him compile a record of 12-25 as the Giants blundered through a period of rebuilding under Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge. But in 2022, things began to look up for the Giants with the hiring of Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll as head coach. Despite a limited roster, Daboll helped guide the team to a 9-7-1 record, far exceeding any expectations prior to the start of the year. Even more remarkably, the Giants won a road playoff game, knocking off the 13-4 Minnesota Vikings before being hammered 38-7 by the Eagles in the divisional round. Still, Daboll was rewarded with the AP Coach of the Year award for his efforts, and Daniel Jones was rewarded with that contract as a result of the best season of his career so far, with a passer rating of 92.5 to go alongside his 3,200 passing yards and a touchdown to interception ratio of 15-5. As we've said, the Giants' decision to award this $40 million a year has drawn diversion and criticism ever since, and is another example of an NFL team being backed into tying down another quarterback who performs at an even above average level, scared of more quarterback years in purgatory. In addition to this, the amount of money that is tied down in the Jones contract has obviously limited the team's ability to spend elsewhere, including watching Saquon Barkley slip away this offseason, as the team wouldn't, or simply couldn't, pay both him and Daniel Jones long term. So without any cash on hand to bring in a big name free agent, Daboll and his team have to hope that their 6th overall pick is the man to save them all this year, and he just might be. So far, Malik Neighbors has exceeded the already extremely high expectations that have been set for him. In Week 1 against the Vikings, the Giants suffered a dispiriting 28-6 home loss, in a game that got away from them early and never really looked like winning. But one of the few bright spots that day was Malik Neighbors, who put up 66 yards on 5 catches, leading the team in scrimmage yards on the day. While being a constant threat in the short yardage game, Neighbors also did record 2 25-yard receptions on 3rd down, which is huge, the exact kind of plays that this Giants passing game is severely lacking. But of course, all of this left little mark on the scoreboard as the Giants whimpered to a home loss, amplifying the criticism faced by Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll. Next up would be a trip to DC, where Neighbors would face off against his college quarterback and 2023 Heisman Trophy winner, Jayden Daniels and his Washington Commanders. In this one, New York was far more competitive, and Neighbors was involved even more, picking up 127 yards, receiving on 10 receptions in just his 2nd NFL game. He would also score his first NFL touchdown just before halftime, a 4-yard reception on what was his 3rd reception of the drive, as Daniel Jones had already established himself as his favorite target through this early on in his career. This was a real breakout game for Neighbors, even if it was against the Commanders team that had the worst defense in all of pro football last season. And despite playing a huge role in the Giants offense outscoring Washington 3 touchdowns to none, he would still end up on the losing side again, with the Commanders kicker kicking 7 field goals en route to a 21-18 win for the home team. And as well as he played, Neighbors did have to take some responsibility for the loss, having dropped a crucial ball on 4th and 4 when the game was tied 18-18 late in the game, with the Giants firmly in field goal range. Neighbors was clearly distraught and took the loss badly, as he watched for his team to fall 0-2. But he promised to not let this affect him and vowed to come back stronger for the trip to Cleveland in Week 3. And certainly, he didn't disappoint. Going into the 2-minute warning on Sunday, the Giants and Browns were tied at 7 in a scrappy defensive slugfest, and by halftime, Malik Nabers had more than made his mark on this one and showed everyone just what he can bring to this Giants offense. On 3rd and goal, he plucked a Daniel Jones throw out of the air and showed incredible control to get both feet down in the end zone for a touchdown, with Bryant's cornerback Martin Emerson only being able to watch on like the rest of us. This was the second time he'd been a victim of Nabers on that drive, having been lost by him down the sideline, showing the size that he possesses in addition to that remarkable speed. And with just 11 seconds in the half, Nabers scored again, finding spaces across the middle for a pass that Daniel Jones just couldn't miss, making the score 21-7. And while Cleveland did reply in the 4th quarter, the Giants held out for a hard-fought win, and one which Vegas certainly was not anticipating. For Nabers, this has been a record-breaking start to his pro career. No player in the entire 104-year history of the league has ever recorded 20 receptions and 3 touchdowns in his first 3 games, highlighting just how much of an impact he has already made. And he's also taken a record previously held by Mike Evans as the youngest player to catch 2 touchdowns in a game at just 21 years and 56 days old. We're just 3 games into the season, and there's no doubt that the New York Football Giants have their new wide receiver 1. Nabers has accounted for almost half of the receiving yards of the team, with 271 through his first 3 games, and there's no reason to suggest why that trend will slow down anytime soon. And it might be a little too early here, but a struggling New York Giants team drafting an explosive wide receiver out of LSU and having a phenomenal rookie year? It's not hard to ignore the comparisons to Odell Beckham Jr. Beckham was a legitimate superstar in his time in New York, winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year award and being named a 3-time Pro Bowler and setting records at the time for production early on in his career. And realistically, Nabers could be well placed to do similar, in part because of the severe lack of other options in this Giants passing game. Up next for New York is a Thursday night football clash at home to the Dallas Cowboys. 10 years ago, it was prime time against Dallas that made Odell Beckham made the catch and announced himself on the national stage as a true force to be reckoned with. Keep an eye out for Nabers this week and in every week going forward as he continues his quest to bring the Giants back to relevance and give hope to Daniel Jones, Brian Daboll, and of course the Giants faithful. How many games do you think the Giants will win this year? And will Malik Nabers win Offensive Rookie of the Year? Can he be as good as Odell Beckham Jr. was? Let us know in the comments.